Okay, now let's look at my mix template. This is basically what I have. As you can notice, I don't have any audio tracks in this template. And the reason is very simple. This is the template that I'm using when I mix a new song, when I have a new song to mix. So this is my initial empty template that I'm going to start with. Then I'm going to add some other stuff depending on the song that I'm mixing. So this is my current template that I have right now. Now, a template is something that I update on a regular basis. Years ago, when I first made my mix template available, it was a bit different than what it is right now. But it's actually the same type of template. So there's some basic stuff that is still there, but I added some other stuff through the years. And this is something that is normal. And this is going to happen on your end as well. You're going to start with your template and you're going to add some stuff up. Maybe at some point, some of the stuff is not going to work anymore, and you just want to try some other stuff that will actually work for a while, and then maybe replacing those afterwards. So it's kind of a never-ending process. That is your mix template. But this is what I have right now, and I'm going to go through the mix template and explain to you everything that you see on the screen. First, let's start by the right side of my mix console. First of all, I divided the mix console into two different parts. So the right side is static. It's not going to move if I move my faders around. Okay, so that right side is always going to stay put. And the reason is pretty simple. I always want to have those accessible. So basically those are my mix buses. So I have one mix bus for the drums, one for the bass, one for the guitars, the keys, the vocals. I also have the rear bus channel right here. That I made a video on. It's the Andrew Shep's rear bus compression technique. If you want to take a look, I am going to leave the link right in below the video you're watching right now. So this sometimes I will use that, some other times I'm not going to use it. So there's some stuff in there in the template that if I don't use, I just remove, while mixing the song that I'm working on. But I keep it there because I know that is not going to happen on every song, So the stuff that I have on this template are going to be used in some parts. But if I don't need them, I just remove them. So let's say I don't need this rear bus. In that case, I would remove the rear bus. Now, this rear bus compressor channel is linked to those two rear buses. Again, I made a video on that, so if you want to watch this video, the link is going to be down below. Then I have my stereo out. Now, the stereo out will act as my main stereo bus. This is my mix bus, and it's a separate group that I created to be used as a stereo out. And this is where I'm going to insert all of my mix bus processing that I have right here. Now, all the plugins, for the most part, are deactivated. Okay, I'm going to get to that later. But let's go back to the mix bus. Now, that mix bus will contain the entire mix, but basically those channels, because all of the mix, all of my other channels in my session will be divided into those group channels, basically those mix instrument channels. And then those channels are going to be routed into this stereo out. And then that stereo out is going to go to the main output of CUBASE. Okay, now you're going to ask me, why don't you use your CUBASE master out as your main stereo out and insert plugins on this channel? The reason is I always want to keep that channel at unity gain, first of all, and I don't want to have any processing on this channel. The only plugins that I'm going to insert on this channel will be analyzing plugins like span or reference plugins like there's one that I love to use. That is named, I forgot the name of that plugin, but it's called Magic AB. Yeah, so that is a plugin that I would add on this channel as a reference plugin. And same for a frequency analyzer plugin. okay, or a VU meter. Okay, this is all the plugins, metering plugins, frequency analyzer plugins, and reference plugins. So those types of plugins, reference plugins, VU meters or metering plugins, and the frequency analyzing plugins also will be inserted into that channel because they don't make any difference. They're not going to affect the sound of your signal, but they're just going to analyze your signal and give you some data related to your mix. And also, because I like to use a reference track. So I'm going to always have a reference. If I'm not using the Magic AB, for instance, I'm going to use a reference track that is always here on top, okay, or the first channel on my mix console. That will be used as a reference. So usually that channel will always be muted. And when I want to reference my mix to my reference track, I'm only going to click on solo, and that is routed directly on the master bus because I don't want that track, that reference track, to go through all the mix bus processing. So by having the mix bus processing channel separated from the main output, the master output from CUBASE, it gives me the advantage of monitoring that reference track without any plugins, okay, any processing plugins done by that stereo channel. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I keep those two output, those two stereo outs independent in a way. Okay, so the first one is my main stereo out where I'm going to insert all my processing plugins for my mix bus, and the main master out from CUBASE is going to be used for referencing plugins or my reference track or some other types of metering or analyzing plugins of some sort. So that's the reason why I have a separate stereo out channel. Okay, so that was a long explanation for a very simple thing, but I just want you to grab this and to understand why I am using it this way. Okay, now those are what I called my mix buses that I work with. Now I also have a VCA channel here that is going to take care of all the effects channel tracks, most of them anyways, okay? All the effects channels that are related to reverb and delays are going to be linked to that VCA fader, okay? So it's not to necessarily to bring down the volume of those effects channels, but just to have a control over the mute and solo buttons right here, okay? So if I just want to solo my all of my my effects at the same time, I'm able to do so. Okay, I can just bypass all of the effects by clicking on mute, and I can also do the same if I want to solo those. It's just kind of a workflow type of thing that can be useful during mixing. Okay, but this is not mandatory, but this is something that I like to do. And everything that I'm doing right now in this template is not something that you need to do. This is only my personal preferences on working with this type of template. So I hope you can get something out of that. Okay, so now let's go and look at the left side of the mix console and look at the drums. I do a lot of live drum recordings, and a lot of the music I mix will include a live drum. Okay, so this is why I put a lot of attention to this part of my mix template. So I'm going to start by the first channel right here. Those channels in blue are group channels, basically. Okay, so I have one for my entire drum kit. That channel is going to go into the mix drum channel right here. Okay, so all the drums are going into this channel first, the drum kit group channel, and then it's routed to the mix drum channel. All the effects are in purple. Okay, so those are the effects channels. Some will be reverb for the snare and the toms. Those will be a type of a room effect. Okay, and now this big room effect, I made a video on that specific effect. And all the plugins in this template will be CUBASE plugins. Those are not necessarily the plugins that I'm going to use on a regular basis, but I just wanted to just to give you an alternative on the stuff that I'm usually using in my regular mix template. So this is the type of CUBASE alternative. But this channel, I actually use it on all of my mixes. It's a very cool way to create a big drum room effect with only CUBASE plugins. I'm going to leave the link to that video down below also. So I have this. I have also Reverence that I use to simulate a room. That can be useful. And again, those channels, all of those, I don't necessarily use them all on every mix. Okay, so sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. So I'm going to delete what I don't use as I go in the mix that I'm working on. Okay, then I have, if we go to the first effects channel right here, I have the Drum New York, which is a parallel compressor channel that I'm going to use in parallel. So basically, I'm going to send the entire drum bus to this channel and blend that with the dry signal. So I'm not going to put any compressor on my main drum bus. I'm going to just use the compressor in parallel, okay? Now, I also have a, the second one is a drum distortion. Basically, it's a distortion that I'm going to add. And I'm mainly going to use this one on the kick, the toms, and the snare that I'm going to send to this channel in parallel also, and I blend this with to my taste basically. So I made a one version of that with quadraphase and some EQ also, and of course a bunch of compression. Again, those parameters might not work instantly. You're going to have to tweak that around. And this is going to be the case with all the plugins that are included in this template. Now, there's not a lot, but there's the basic stuff. But it's not going to be like ready to use right away. You'll have to tweak around. Okay, that is a bit normal. Then we have the KS New York, which is the kick and snare parallel processor right here. That is my channel where I have the tube compressor with a bunch of drive into it. And this is basically the attack and the release time that I'm going to use on a regular basis. I make sure the ratio is high, so it's basically limiting. And again, you're going to have to tweak the gain reduction to your taste. And this is something that I like to blend with my kick and snare. I also have another type of parallel compression channel. That will include some compression, of course, and some distortion. And you have the CUBASE version of what would be close to what I usually use. For this type of drive and compression and drive, I love to use the Soundtoys Decapitator. This is one of my top saturation plugin out there that is pretty cool. Then I have the snare verb, okay, which is like a regular room basically that you can use. Again, you can use something to your taste. This is just there. This is actually not what I usually use, okay, but it's going to be a very good start point if you want to use a CUBASE plugin. Then I have about close to the same tom verb. I love to have them separate from each other, like having the snare separate than the toms, depending on the song I'm mixing. Sometimes I love to have a bit more sustain out of that reverb for the toms opposed to a snare. So this is why I'm going to keep them separated. And sometimes I'm just going to use the same one and eliminate the tom verb channel. So that will depend. But it's there in my template every time I want to use it. Then I have my big room, which we looked at earlier, and we also looked at the other fake room emulation. So those are my effects for my drums. Now, all of my channels, my effects channels right here that we just looked at, are routed into the mix drum bus, which is this one right here. Okay, so they're not going into my drum kit bus, they're going into the mix drum bus. And why I do that, I want to keep those separated from that mix bus, because that drum kit group is going also into that compression channel. Okay, so I just want to avoid compressing, adding compression on some other compression channels and reverbs and stuff. So I keep them separated. So that's the reason why I do so. Okay, now I also have other groups. Okay, that are going to be used for my regular drum. So I'm going to explain to you why. I have a group for the kick, and those are all stereo groups, and same for my my main channels. Actually, I'm just going to go back a bit, and those channels, they're all in stereo for now, but those kick and snare channel could be mono. This could be a mono channel easily. But the minute I add some toms and stuff, I'm going to keep those stereo. So I could actually keep this one a mono. So it's up to you. Not mandatory. You can still use it in stereo. It doesn't matter much. But that one could be mono. Now, as far as the groups goes, I have one for the kicks, one for the snare, toms, overheads, rooms, and perk if I have other types of rhythmic instruments like perks, or this can be also called drum loops, and so on. So I'm going to leave that group for that. Usually I'm going to have more than one kick track. I'm going to have like probably 2 mics on the kick, or if I have one mic, probably I'm going to use a sample on top of that, and maybe a sub kick sample. So I'm going to route all of those kick channels into this channel. And also this one can be in mono if you wish to. They're all stereo, but again, it doesn't matter much. And same for the snare. If I'm using more than a snare track, I'm going to route everything in that group channel. Let's say I have a bottom snare mic on top of the top snare mic. Both of those channels are going to be routed into this channel, this group channel. And also if I want to add a sample, I can also route this into this channel. Sometimes I'm going to add some processing on that group instead of individual tracks, if that makes sense. And sometimes I'm going to treat them separately. So it depends. Usually for the kick drum, it will depend on if I'm using a sample or not. Sometimes if I'm using only 2 mics out of the kick drum, I route them into this channel. Chances are that I'm going to process that channel as if it was only one microphone, okay, as a whole. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. But I'm going to start by doing it this way before going into individual tracks. So it will depend on the recording. So this is why I have groups for snare and kick. And same for toms. I'm going to treat the tom sometimes on individual channels and sometimes as a whole also. So all of the toms, the floors, and everything are going to go into this channel. And same for the overheads. I'm going to send them into this channel also. Room, that will depend if I have more than one room mic. Sometimes I have one. So if I do have one, I'm going to eliminate that channel. So I'm not going to have any use of this channel. Same if I don't have any perks or loops, I'm going to just get rid of those channels. But they are there in my template to start with. Because sometimes I'm going to have more than one room mics. In that case, I'm going to route them into this group channel. And then those channels are going into my drum kit group that we saw earlier. And now you have the basic routing of the drums. Okay, so just for as an example, let's just load a couple of drum tracks and show you how I would manage that on a mix when I first start to work on the mix. Now, on the right side of the of my project window, I have the right zone open. And I'm going to go to the folder where I have a bunch of tracks that I want to import. And let's import, I don't know, let's go with kick sample, floor, and D, by the way I name those, it's basically for drums, so it's easier to import into a session. So I tend to try to get this code around when I prep my tracks for mixing or when I record. Then I'm going to have overheads. Let's go with the room. Snare bottom, snare sample, snare sub kick, tom, What else do I have? I think that's basically it. So let's go with those. And I'm just going to drag them over and bring them right here. Different tracks. All right. Okay, so I'm going to bring them up just on top of the, or just below the last group channel. And bring those directly to the top. And there you go. So now I'm going to add these tracks to my drum color, okay, to match my color code. And as you can tell, my group, all the group tracks related to my main track are going to use the same color code. Let's do that again. Yeah, I'm going to use the same color code, but a bit more darker. Okay, so just to be able to make them a bit different, visually speaking. But I know they're in the same. They're the groups of the same instrument, and I'm going to do the same for other instruments as well. So, anyways, so I have my kick sample. Okay, let's go with kick, floor, overheads. Bring that to the bottom. Okay, so now I have my I have 3 kick drum tracks. I'm going to select them, make sure my quick link is active, click on the output on top, come down to kick group. There you go. Okay, I'm going to do the same for the snare. So I have 3 snares right here, 3 snare channels. I'm going to route them to snare group. Tom and floor, just going to move them around after. They're going to go to Tom's group. Overheads are going to go to group overheads. I only have 1 channel, okay, 1 track for the room. So I'm just going to click and route this one directly into my my drum kit group, which is this one right here. So I'm not going to need, in this case, I am not going to need my my room stereo channel, or even the perk in that, for that matter. So I'm just going to remove those out of my template for this one. And this is what I'm going to get. And by default, those will be routed right here, and those will also, by part of my template, are going to be routed to the correct channels. So that makes the workflow a bit faster at this point. So I'm just going to bring all of those down. Okay, so if I click on play, let me mute the reference. Okay, I have the kick, the sample, the sub kick. All right, I'm just going to move a track here. I'm going to move the floor, bring that down to just below the tom. Okay, so you get the idea. Let me pan those rooms, those overheads, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is a basic dry drum sound. It's a quick rough mix of the drum recording. So let's add a bit of processing here. Okay, so you can, in a very fast way, get to a decent drum sound in a very short amount of time. So this is why I love to use a mix template to start a mix. And from that point, I can move things around and customize that to my taste, use different plugins, and so on. Okay, so, but this is a very good start. So that gives you an example of how I would use my mix template. So if we go down the road a bit. Okay, I'm going to continue my tour of the mix template. Now, next I have the bass. So same is going to go for my bass. I'm going to have a bass group channel. And that will depend on how many bass tracks I have. If I only have one bass track, I'm probably just going to use the mix bass channel and bypass this one. If I have more than one, I'm going to use this one and process this channel instead of those two individually. But it depends. Sometimes I will process two bass tracks individually. Like if I'm recording a line bass at the same time as a bass amp. Now I'm probably going to take advantage of that and mix those separately and then add a bit more processing on the bass group, and then add those to this mix bass. And why I keep those separated? Because I could bypass this channel and go straight to this one, and that will happen depending on the mix I'm working on. But if I have a more complex of a mix with the synth basses and stuff that I want to keep in the bass channel, then I'm going to create a bass group track for my acoustic bass, and then all of the other synth bass, for example, will go straight to the mix bass, and the output of that acoustic bass group channel will also go into the same mix bass channel. So I hope that makes sense. But this is the way I love to work with my bass channels. Next, I have the guitars. I have groups for electric guitars depending on the parts, and also acoustic guitars. Okay, and then those all of those groups are routed into the mix guitar bus. And this is, again, that will depend on the amount of guitar tracks I have on my session. Sometimes I'm only going to need one stereo group for the electric guitars. Sometimes I'm going to use several depending on how many parts I have. If I have like a bunch of double stacked guitars that are panned left and right, I'm going to route them into that same group channel, okay? And then route this channel to, again, mix guitars. So those are going to be separated from the clean electric guitars that are playing in the verse, for example. Okay, different parts. So I might end up with several of those stereo group channels for electric guitars. For acoustic guitars, usually I'm just going to end up with one, route all the acoustic guitar tracks into this stereo acoustic guitar group channel. And then all of my reverbs and delays from those channels, okay, those channels for the guitar only, are also going to be routed, like the drums, are going to be routed into the mixed guitars channel. Okay, sometimes I will route them into a specific electric guitar group channel. That will depend, but on the most part, they will be routed into the main mixed guitar bus. For vocals, I have a bunch of stuff here, and also that changes depending on the mix I'm working on, depending on how many vocals I have to deal with. But basically it goes like this. I have lead vocal, I have the lead vocal group. Okay. Sometimes I'm going to end up with more than one lead vocal track. Maybe I'm going to double or triple the vocals on some parts of the song, a chorus, for example, sometimes the verse, and I'm going to treat that in one channel, which is going to be this one. And this is where I'm going to add some processing. So I'm going to use this for my lead vocal. If I only have one lead vocal and I'm not planning on having more, I'm going to bypass this. And I have one for all lead vocals. Again, that will depend on the mix. Sometimes I'm gonna work the lead vocal separately. I'm going to have one channel that's going to take care of the verse, and the other channel is going to take care of the chorus. That depends on the range of the vocal, depends on the type of melody where I'm dealing with. Sometimes there's some stuff I want to have different from the verse than the chorus, and in this case, I'm going to have them separately. And so that's why I have like that main lead vocal channel, that everything is going into this channel as far as lead vocal goes, and from that point I can add my send effects out of this main channel. Okay, but again, this is something that most of the time, if I don't need to separate the verses from the chorus and stuff like that, I'm gonna end up using only one group channel instead of two. But it's in the template just in case I need it. If I don't, I delete it and I forget about it. But again, it's there only in case. And I'm gonna use usually I'm gonna use this one for to add some effects like reverb, delay and stuff like that, and also parallel processing that I can also use with this channel or this one. Depends on the mix also. But this is the parallel processing that I like to use for vocals, which is going to include EQ, compression, and again some more EQ afterwards. This is a starting point. It depends. Sometimes that changes. Again, it's only a starting point, but this is the main routing idea. And I also have a doubling effect that I like to use sometimes to thick up the vocal. And I'm going to use the channel called Doubler. So I made a video a year ago, I think, on this technique using Cloner, which is a CUBASE plugin. I love to use Doubler, which is a plugin from Waves, to do so. So this is the basic technique that I use to add some thickness to the vocal, but there's some other ways you can do it. You can also use only one plugin, but this is what I use in my template when I work on the mix. So basically the way that is set up, I have a group channel right here. And those are audio tracks. Now, there's nothing in those tracks at the moment, but what I do, I just copy paste the lead vocal track, okay, the actual audio event, into those channels, okay, the same event, the same audio as I have on my my main track, my main lead vocal track. I'm going to copy right here at the same place, and I'm just going to duplicate the same signal. And there's some different types of processing going on from one channel to the other with those plugins, which is going to add thickness to that sound. And then I just blend that to taste. Okay, so that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this. But you can also, instead of using audio channels, you can use group channels or effects channels and route them in a different way. It depends. So I like to keep that separated from the processing that the lead vocal has. It adds a bit more differences to the signal, so it adds to the thickness of the lead vocal. Okay, but again, there's several ways to do so. I'm going to leave the link to that video again down below so you can have a look. But this is part of my template, and that's the way I use it. Then I have some channels for backs, and again, I have two of them depending on what I'm going to be working on. So if I have different back vocal parts, I have like one specific part for the chorus and then some vocals for the verses. They will each have their own stereo group. Okay, so they're going to be routed into a different group. And this is why I have two. I have the main one, which is going to include everything. And I have a second one, or I can add even more if I have more vocals, and those will go into this one. Okay, so it's the same principle, same idea on what I have with electric guitars, for example. So it's going to depend on the part of back vocals. In case if I have a lot of parts, those are going to be useful. If I only have one single back vocal or like a minimum of back vocal tracks, I'm not going to need those. I'm probably going to need only one stereo group. And again, those are going to go in the mix vocal channel, which will include all lead vocals and all back vocals. So this is the way I like to use them. Then I have a back vocal parallel compression if I want to, and parallel processing. If I need to, it's there, it's in the template. If I don't, I get rid of it. And then I'm going to have my effects like reverb, some slap delay, that I have here by default. And I have like another compressor, I think. I'm going to change that around, so in the version of the template you'll have, I'm going to add an actual stereo long delay that I like to use also. So I love to have one slap delay, one room reverb, a longer reverb, and a longer delay, so I can blend those together or just use what I need depending on the genre of music I'm working with. And then to finish that off, I have the rear bus channel. I'm going to leave the link again below if you want to look at those videos talking about that. So this is basically how I'm using this template. All of the plugins are bypassed, by the way. Most of them anyways, so except what I have here on the drums, usually only the channels are bypassed or are brought down when I start loading my template. Okay, so I don't want to load the template, do the rough mix and be stuck with a bunch of effects. So I make sure that if they're not bypassed, all the channels, the effects channels are down. Okay, so I can work on the raw initial rough mix, unprocessed rough mix before adding some effects like reverb and stuff like that. So I make sure all the plugins are bypassed if I have some, and I also make sure that all the effects channels are down. Okay, and then I can add those over once my first rough mix is done. Now on the right side of my mix console, I have several channels. They are VCA empty channels that are used only for color coding. Okay, they don't have any faders. So the only use of those faders is to just to give my assistant, if I have someone else loading my mixes on my template, he's gonna know which color goes on which tracks. Okay, so I have one color code track for my drums, so he's gonna know which tone of blue I want on my drums. Same for the bass, another color code track for my guitars, acoustic guitars, vocals, backs, and so on. So this is basically how I work and I use my my mix template. So this is the end of the video. I hope that was helpful. I hope you have a better understanding on how I use a mix template. And from that point, take that template, customize it to your taste, to your needs, to your reality, to your mixing reality, and then you can use that. You create yourself your own template afterwards and use that. But before I finish, just want to show you a last thing here. Once you're done with this template, so let's say I am done with this one. I'm just going to remove this and this. I'm just going to do a bit of cleanup here. Delete that from my, I don't need that anymore. So I'm just going to remove those media, bring those to the trash or remove those. Okay, now my session is empty. Now let's say I'm happy with this template. There's two ways I can work that out. I can click on File, Save as Template, name that template to, I don't know, CUBASE 2020 mix. I'm gonna click on OK. So next time I'm gonna create a new project and I go to more, I'm gonna have the list of the templates I have, and my CUBASE 2020 mix template is going to be available for me to work with. And from that at that point, I can choose a location and do as I do when I create a new project. But this way, your template is going to be loaded instead of an empty project. So that's one way of doing it. Or if you have a session, a recording session that you already worked on or that comes from a client, you can load your template by clicking on File and going to Import and Tracks from Project. Select your templates project and then you'll have the list of all of your tracks. You can click on Select All, import those without events and parts, and that those channels will be added to your current recording, and you can go from there and route things around. So there you go. This is how I use a mix template. So I hope that was helpful. Don't forget that you can always ask me questions directly on a YouTube comment or by email. You can write to me at info at mixdownonline.com if you have any questions. And I'm going to do the best, my best to answer those on maybe future videos or straight by email. So, all right, my friends, have a nice day. And again, thank you for being part of the Mixdown Online community. Have a nice one.